It's my great pleasure, my honor to introduce our keynote speaker today, who I had the pleasure of meeting back in 2023 down in Killarney at the GenSpect conference. Stephanie Davies-Arai founded Transgender Trend in 2015. This was the first UK organisation to advocate for evidence-based healthcare for gender dysphoric children and young people and fact-based teaching in schools. Stephanie was shortlisted for the John Maddox Prize in 2018 for the School's Guide, Supporting Gender Diverse and Trans-Identified Students in Schools. She is also a communication skills expert, teacher trainer, parent coach, author of Communicating with Kids, and an experienced speaker. She was an intervener in the High Court in support of Keira Bell and Mrs. A's landmark case against the Tavistock Gender Identity Development Service. And in 2022, she was awarded the British Empire Medal as Director of Transgender Trend Services for Children in the late Queen's Jubilee Birthday Honours List. So I'm delighted to turn it over to our keynote speaker, Stephanie Davies-Arai.
Hello everyone, it's great to see such a big audience here, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you. I'm going to just give an overview of the sudden appearance of so-called trans children over the last decade, children who didn't really exist 10 years ago. Just to give you what I hope will be a broad understanding of how we got here and what's happening now. Because before the internet, gender dysphoria, as it's called, which means unhappiness with being a boy or unhappiness with being a girl, basically, it was extremely rare, and it was completely undocumented in teenage girls, and that's the group that is spearheading this huge rise in referrals to gender clinics now. It was very rare for boys to start developing this cross-sex identity or a trans identity or gender dysphoria after puberty. For girls, it was completely unheard of. This is what's happened. This is the trend. The Tavistock Clinic was established in 1989, and historically there were very few children going, under 50 referrals a year, and this jumped to thousands of referrals in a really short space of time. There are now around 8,000 children on the waiting list for gender services, and the number of children who've passed through the Tavistock over the last decade is estimated to be around 9,000, and it's estimated to be around 2,000 who went on to puberty blockers, but we don't know the exact figures because they didn't keep records. So the numbers started rising in around 2010, 2011, and that coincides with the Tavistock's early intervention trial of puberty blockers. In 2015, there was over 100% rise in referrals. It plateaued a bit during COVID, and that was followed by another surge. The Tavistock Clinic was shut down after the NHS commissioned an independent review that published its final report in April last year. And the CAS review was a 4-year extensive investigation into medical services for children. It's the most comprehensive research report in this area in the world. And the review research team conducted systematic reviews, which is the gold standard of research, analysing the results of all published peer-reviewed studies in this area. So with that huge rise in referrals, not only did the numbers increase, which was historically unprecedented, but the sex ratio changed. For majority boys, it became majority girls driving this increase. And it was not only sex, but age that changed. Historically, it was pre-pubertal boys, very young, little boys who thought they were girls. Now it's predominantly adolescent girls, post-puberty, girls from around the age of 10 at the start of puberty and through the teenage years. And if you note there, at age 17, the figures drop off, but that's because they are referred to the adult clinics at that age. And sex and age are not the only changes, and we've known this for a while, but the Cass review confirmed it. The cohort of children who say they're trans are a very vulnerable group. This is how Cass described it. She said there's a greater complexity of presentation with high levels of neurodiversity and or co-occurring mental health issues and a higher prevalence than in the general population of adverse childhood experiences and looked after children. So that means lots of autistic children, around 35 to 48%, according to Tavistock figures, children who've experienced previous abuse, previous sexual abuse, children in care homes, children with pre-existing mental health issues are being pulled into this. So what has changed to result in this huge number suddenly of so-called transgender children? There's been a global transgender rights movement, and that movement has politicised this one area of healthcare. They've aggressively promoted an ideology of gender identity, and that's the idea that human beings are born with an innate sense of being male or female, and that this feeling overrides biological reality. And this was the birth of the trans child. So it used to be that we would call a child a gender dysphoric child or a child with a cross-sex identity, and we treated children as children, and we knew that they were on a developmental pathway. But now we call these children transgender children, which assumes that they are transgender, it's innate, and they will be transgender as adults. And this is the opposite of the acceptance of gender nonconformity, if we want to teach children to challenge gender stereotypes. But previously it was the basis of reality and the understanding that the child is developing, the child is a child. That was what informed our previous approach to these children. But the idea and the belief in innate gender identity also changed the approach. So previously, the approach was called watchful waiting or watch and wait. It recognises reality. It recognises the child as a child. Gender affirmation is the new approach, which affirms the child's identity, but denies reality. And it also denies the child the chance to manage that reality and come to terms with it and grow up. So essentially, gender affirmation affirms an ideology. It doesn't affirm the child. It affirms the belief in gender identity, and it denies the reality of sex. We have 10 studies that show that childhood gender dysphoria is strongly associated with a lesbian, gay, or bisexual outcome, and that for the majority of the children, so around 85%, desist in those feelings during or after puberty. So they desist and come to terms with their biological sex, 85%. However, the first large ongoing study of children treated with the gender affirmative approach, which means children who were socially affirmed and socially transitioned from a very early age, shows by contrast only a 2.5% desistance rate after 5 years follow-up. And this is obvious. If you tell a little boy that he's a girl, why would he not believe the adults that he trusts? So the old model of watchful waiting was a clinically based model, and the new approach of gender affirmation was not developed because of any clinical need or any research. It was an activist-led model. In other words, the activists, as well as dictating the curriculum in schools, have also done the same in healthcare. So that puberty blockers trial that I mentioned that the Tavistock started in 2010, that was under big influence from the biggest parent or child trans group in the UK, Mermaids. So it was activists who insisted that children needed puberty blockers and would otherwise go abroad to get them. I'm just going to look at the CAS review because it's the most authoritative report we have that we can take information from and use it. Because CAS says, although the focus of the review is on support from the point of entry into the NHS, no individual journey begins at the front door of the NHS, rather in the child's home, family and school environment. So the journey starts all too often in schools. So I want to look at the information. The rest of this talk will be the information that we have in the CAS review that we can trust in this area and say, how do we apply this to schools? What should schools be doing? And I'd like to look at watchful waiting versus gender affirmation and ask the question, which approach is in the best interests of the child, using the research that we have in the CAS review, the research that we have on both approaches. Because there's no evidence that watchful waiting caused any harm. And it's been replaced by the gender affirmative approach without any clinical reason to do so. So, CAS calls social transition, which is happening in schools, where a girl is affirmed as a boy or a boy is affirmed as a girl. She described it as an active intervention that may have significant effects on the child or young person in terms of their psychological functioning and longer-term outcomes. Teachers are not qualified to do that. And of course, it is beyond children. We cannot ask children to affirm classmates. That is not appropriate to ask children to do that. What the CAS review found was that the medical intervention, that social transition it's more likely to lead to a medical pathway, and there's no evidence that it has good mental health effects. But those who socially transitioned at an earlier age and or prior to being seen in clinic were more likely to proceed to a medical pathway. And the medical pathway means puberty blockers, inevitably followed by cross-sex hormones. So this was the result of the Tavistock's early intervention trial on puberty blockers. Between 15 and 34% of participants reliably deteriorated, and up to 70% there was no change. So one of the ways that activists have got us to affirm children as the opposite sex and give them puberty blockers is by saying that they'll commit suicide if we don't. Well, there's never been any evidence to support that. But this shows that the puberty blockers do not do that job. They don't reliably improve mental health. And these results are very bad, considering also that you would expect a child's mental health to actually gradually improve naturally as they get older. So if children are going on to puberty blockers, there's not really any reason in terms of mental health to do so, but the costs are huge. On this pathway, children face a future of infertility, loss of sexual function, and increased risk of serious health conditions, including cancers and heart disease, and that's apart from the loss of bone density and cognitive impairment implied in the use of blockers alone. So we need to ask, is this approach kind? A large study in last year in Finland that looked at the rate of suicide of these children showed that clinical gender dysphoria does not appear to be predictive of all-cause nor suicide mortality when psychiatric treatment history is accounted for. In other words, these children have the same suicide risk as children who are attending other mental health services, who have a range of mental health problems. It's no different to that. A retrospective study of over 90 million patients at 56 US healthcare organizations found that gender-affirming surgery, on the other hand, is significantly associated with elevated suicide attempt risks. This pathway does not have good outcomes from going to puberty blockers, to cross-sex hormones, to surgery. And surgery is becoming more common in the UK, following on from blockers and hormones. And again, from the Tavistock's early intervention puberty blockers trial, 98% of those children went on to cross-sex hormones, and we don't know how many then went on to surgery. But double mastectomy for girls is becoming more and more popular. There were 5,463 requests for this surgery between April 2020 and December 2024, and that's on the NHS alone, and many go private. So this is the pathway we put children on when we first affirm a girl as a boy. And what we do also, as well as putting them on this pathway with huge health risks that are, and changes that are irreversible, we also close down a future. So I just want to end with something about children's rights, that children have rights to an open future, to be denied fertility, to be denied adult sexual function before they can possibly know what those things are and what they are signing up for and what they are agreeing to sacrifice before they even know what they are. I think the question between using a watchful waiting approach where children are accepted and supported and helped in ways that they need according to their mental health needs, but not affirmed as the opposite sex, is the clearly more safer, more compassionate and kinder approach to children. And I don't think gender affirmation of children can ever be described as kind. Thank you.